A suitcase hit the curb like a verdict, my son-in-law's hand still on the handle as he smiled for the doorbell camera. "You're done here, old man." That single sentence, cold, practiced, public, tore through 40 years of work and a lifetime of my name. In one afternoon, I was evicted from my own porch, branded online as unstable, and nearly stripped of my house by a forged signature that looked too much like mine. That was the moment I learned betrayal can wear family clothes and carry legal paper. What followed wasn't rage, it was a ledger, freezing the sale, exposing a fake voice that proved I consented, and turning my home into a trust my grandson will someday inherit. I didn't run. I relocated the fight and won on paper in daylight. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The kettle sings a thin, familiar note that always lands somewhere behind my ribs. It is dented on the left side where my wife clipped it against the sink years ago, and it still wobbles when I set it down. I let the steam wash my face, pour the water over grounds that bloom like dark soil after rain, and wipe the ring on the stove the way she used to. Routine is a simple religion. Mine begins with coffee and ends on the porch. Outside, dusk is folding over Asheville. The slope in front of the house runs down into a quilt of oaks and black gum. And beyond that, the Blue Ridge stacks itself in soft blue bars, each ridge a paler ghost of the last. Cicadas drill the humid air. Somewhere downhill, a dog barks once and thinks better of it. I sit in the swing that hangs from lag screws I set into the beam myself and watch the valley drink the light. A good day, I tell myself, is coffee, wood grain, and mountain air. The shop is gone now. I sold it after the pandemic slowed the orders to a trickle and taught me that pride will not pay a delivery driver. I kept my tools because a man keeps his tools, and I kept this house because a man needs somewhere for his memories to live. The bank has a file on me, the credit union has my CDs, and the county has my tax bill. None of those papers have my wife's laugh in them. The porch does. My daughter Sarah works nights at Mission Hospital, which means on Sundays she tries to act like a person who sleeps. She married a man named Dylan Mercer who has an easy smile and a permanent shine on his shoes. He talks the way a showroom smells, clean, bright, not quite real. We are cordial in the way men are cordial when the space between them is a woman they both love and habits they do not share. He calls me sir. I call him Dylan. We shake hands as if we are negotiating the weather. In the kitchen, I run a thumb along the banister nicks I carved by accident in 1993, hauling a maple table to the dining room. I kept them as a record the way tree rings are a record. On the mantel, my wife's photograph stands in a simple frame I cut from white oak. The glass throws a small, patient light across the room. The house has been too quiet since she died, but the quiet has softened. It does that. Grief goes from shouting to a low throat clearing you can live with. We have dinner together most Sundays. It is an imperfect habit, but it is ours. Tonight I roast a chicken and split sweet potatoes in the cast iron. Sarah arrives wearing a cardigan and those compression socks she swears by. Dylan is in a jacket no one asked for. He leans against the counter and says, "You know, Rob, the market is still hot. You're sitting on equity that could be working." I slide the pan from the oven and let the question rise like heat. "Houses ought to work for people," he adds, "not the other way around." Sarah nudges him with her elbow and whispers, "Eat first." I set the bird in the middle of the table and reach for the carving knife. "Let's try quiet first," I say, and smile so it does not sound like a reprimand. We talk about the late leaf color and the storm that only threatened to arrive. Sarah checks her phone once when a text buzzes with a night shift update. She says, "Sorry," and I shake my head. "Patients don't wait," I tell her. Dylan cannot help himself. Between bites, he starts again, and this time he dresses it as concern. "I see a lot of folks your age unlocking value," he says. "Short-term rental. Refi. Even a home equity line? I could line up a vendor to optimize your situation." I pour sweet tea into thick glasses and listen in the same way I listen when a board warps in drying, knowing I will have to correct it later. He thinks a house is a lever. I think a house is a memory storage device you can sweep every Saturday. "I'm good," I say. "I like my situation unlocked." It is not a joke, but Sarah smiles anyway in the way daughters try to soften corners. Dylan nods, polishing his politeness. "Of course. Just looking out," he says. The words have a salesman's aftertaste. I pass him the potatoes and watch him butter what is already sweet. After they leave, I wash the plates by hand and stand with my palms on the counter feeling the cool laminate that we never upgraded because we never needed to. I hang the dish towel over the oven handle where my wife would scold me for drips. The kettle goes back on the back burner, its dent catching the last light leaking in under the blinds. I step into the mudroom and touch the hook where my shop apron hangs, still chalked with pencil lines, still smelling faintly of linseed oil and cedar. The pegboard is a map of habits. Every empty hole knows its tool. Night gathers itself. I take my second cup to the porch and watch Blue Hour do its old trick, turning the ridges into paper cutouts. The swing creaks once, as if clearing its throat to speak. Far down the road, a truck engine climbs the grade and holds a gear too long. I could name the make of a truck by its note once. Age steals silly talents before it takes the ones you plan to miss. Headlights push through the trees and paint the underside of leaves, then disappear. I think about Dylan's shoes, about Sarah's tired eyes, about the way a certain kind of advice is just pressure with manners. I think about how my wife called this porch our chapel, how she liked to sit on the step and tie her hair with a rubber band she kept on her wrist. I sip the coffee and let the bitterness sit where truth sits. This house is not an asset to be optimized. It is where I carry the pieces of the people I have been. The mountains finally go black. A breeze shivers the wind chime, and the first crickets hand the night off to the owl somewhere in the pines. I trace the nick in the swing's arm with my thumb, the small scar that means I built something and then used it hard. Down the road, a truck turns again, closer this time, like a thought that has not yet learned my name. I tell myself tomorrow will be ordinary. I tell myself this is still unquestionably my home. Late afternoon pressed down like a damp hand when I turned off Merrimon and climbed the quiet hill toward my place. Thunderheads were stalled over the far ridge, dark anvils that never quite committed to rain. The keys in my pocket felt colder than they should have. Gravel chattered under the tires and the house rose into view between two black gum trees, all cedar and shadow and the steady look of something that had watched me age without complaint. Dylan's silver pickup sat half on the curb, nose toward my porch as if it wanted to dock. The driver door hung open, engine ticking its own heat away. My front door stood wide, the hall inside echoing with the kind of emptiness you hear more than see. On the top step, a battered roller suitcase waited like a verdict. It was my wife's, the hard-shell kind she insisted on after the soft one split at the beach. The handle was extended as if a stranger had paused mid-trip. I cut the engine and sat for a beat, listening to the insects wind down and the house breathe with the change of light. I could smell a faint sweetness I didn't recognize, something like artificial citrus with metal behind it. Later I would learn that was Nulock lubricant, the smell of a door deciding who belonged. Right then I only knew it didn't belong to me. Dylan filled the threshold in a fitted jacket that had no reason to be on my porch. He held a legal-size envelope like a baton, and his smile was the kind a man aims past you. "Evening, sir," he said, loud enough for any neighbor to hear. The term of respect felt like a plastic spoon. I took the first step and stopped. Fresh scuffs marred the jamb where the deadbolt sits. The suitcase caught the corner of my eye again, and with it the torn airport tag from years back, my wife's blocky handwriting still on it, Hale R., because she liked to mark everything in case the world forgot its place. Dylan slid a stack of papers from the envelope and fanned them like a dealer. "We need to move things along," he said. "You've been here a while." "Sarah and I need some space." He held up a page stamped with a notary seal. "Power of attorney. You signed. This allows us to make appropriate transitions for your well-being." The words were polished to a shine by repetition. He pointed at another form, "Consent to transition to senior living," and a typed plan with a logo from an active adult community I had seen advertised on highway billboards between chain restaurants. He went on about liability and fall risks and the importance of acting before something forced our hand. The script was so smooth I could hear the grooves. Sarah drifted into view behind him, scrub top under a cardigan, hair in a loose knot. Her eyes were rimmed red the way a sleepless shift rims them. She didn't meet mine. "Just for a few weeks at Aunt Lila's," she said softly, words tripping over each other, "while we organize." She sounded like someone speaking through a door. Dylan reached for the suitcase, rolled it down the steps, and let it drop to the concrete. The thud reverberated in my chest like a mallet on an old bell. My wife had dragged that case across hotel lobbies in Charleston and Savannah, laughing that wheels beat shoulders every time. Her laughter and the thud did not belong in the same memory. Across the street, Mrs. Delaney hovered near her boxwood hedge, lips pursed into sympathy the camera could read. Next door, the Simmons boy lifted his phone and framed us. The red eye of my own doorbell camera winked. It struck me that I was not being spoken to so much as being staged. The set had props, the audience had arrived, and the script didn't include my lines. Dylan tossed a ring of keys under the boxwood so they landed with a brushed rattle. "These won't work anymore," he said. "We upgraded the smart lock and security. Safer for everyone." He leaned an elbow against the jamb he had scuffed and became the kind of man who blocks a doorway with a smile. "Let's not make this hard." I looked down at my hands. The right still held a receipt from the hardware store, folded twice. The left had prints permanently stained with walnut dust. The iron taste of anger rose like blood from a bitten cheek. I could have pushed, could have raised my voice, could have made a scene for the cameras already making me into one. The porch swing's rope shadow lay across the floorboards like a boundary line drawn in string. I did not cross it. "My house," I said, and it came out too quiet to register on any microphone except the one God keeps. Sarah stepped forward a fraction, then back again. "Please, Dad," she whispered, "just let us figure this out." The worst part of love is how it asks you to forgive while you're still bleeding. Dylan's smile widened into closure. He stepped inside and swung the door with a salesman's finality. The new deadbolt threw itself into metal with a bright, unfamiliar click. Weather stripping hissed as the seal took. That tiny sound told me as much as any gavel would have. This place had accepted a new story about who I was. The suitcase handle felt thin and cheap in my hand, its telescoping arm wobbling at the last inch. The wheels stuttered on the exposed aggregate like a bad knee on gravel. I walked past the neighbors with my chin level because dignity is sometimes nothing more than refusing to provide a face. Someone said, "You hate to see it," and someone else hummed agreement. The phone followed me to the truck and kept recording trees after I was gone. I set the suitcase in the bed with care I used to reserve for finished cabinets. The engine caught on the second turn and settled into the familiar idle that has carried me through blizzards and weddings and empty grocery runs. In the rear view, the porch light blinked on automatically, an algorithm deciding it was dusk. That was new too. The highway took me the way it always has, a ribbon laid down by men I'll never meet, humming under the tires with its quiet vow to deliver a person from one feeling to another in under 12 miles. Neon from the Sunset Motor Inn bled across the windshield like paint dragged by a careless brush. I took the turn, eased under the buzzing sign and backed into a slot with a view of a vending machine promising colder drinks than life delivers. The room smelled of citrus cleaner and secrets. I stood my wife's suitcase upright by the door and unzipped it halfway, not to check the contents. I knew the contents, because most of my life fits in fewer pockets than the world imagines, but to touch the dented kettle handle I had wedged on top. The metal was cool, and the weight in my palms steadied my breath. I set the papers on the small table and flattened the curls at their edges. Under the motel lamp's weak amber, the notary seal looked official enough to convince a stranger. Tomorrow I would read each line until it told me who forged my name. Tomorrow I would call Lila and then a lawyer and then whatever agency answers when a man says someone has decided he is old and therefore movable. Tonight, I let the quiet in, not as surrender, but as staging of my own. This was the last minute I allowed anyone else to define my home. The motel clock ticked like a cheap metronome, a plastic second hand nudging midnight forward one click at a time. I flattened the alleged power of attorney under the lamp and let its weak circle of light show me what it could. Toner dust shimmered where the line weight thickened unnaturally. The tail on the capital R of my name hooked down in a flourish I've never made. My hand, tugged by years of arthritis and habit, always lifts and leaves the serif clean. The notary stamp said Buncombe County and wore a date 2 days after the spinal checkup Dylan insisted on driving me to. The page felt warm at the edges, as if it had been copied and handled recently, not filed in the sleepy normal way true papers live and die. Memory unspooled with the smell of antiseptic and orange vinyl chairs. Dylan had steered me through the clinic door and parked me beside a clipboard fat with signature flags. He said he'd pre-filled the dull parts so the nurse wouldn't need to bother me. The nurse called my name. I signed a single health proxy the nurse handed me. Then Dylan flipped a page back, casual as breath, said it was a duplicate for their records. I signed again, eyes on the nurse's white shoes crossing tile. If guilt were useful, I would harvest it. All I can do with it now is label the moment I let my guard down and place it in the drawer where lessons go. I pulled my spiral notebook closer, the one with sawdust still in its spine, and wrote a list titled, What I Still Control. Driver's license, social security card. Bank debit with a daily limit. I set too low for thieves and sometimes too low for groceries. 2 CDs at the credit union. Truck title in the glove box. Copy of the house deed at home, now as accessible to me as the moon. Underneath I wrote, phone, wallet, kettle, suitcase. Enough. At 8, I called Adult Protective Services in North Carolina and told a woman with a steady voice I believed I was being financially exploited. She asked careful questions, the kind that fence in a story without hurting it. She explained thresholds, patterns they look for, the importance of counsel, and said I should seek an immediate freeze on any title action. When the call ended, I dialed the Register of Deeds. A clerk confirmed a filing number for the POA existed and chirped that a certified copy would be emailed to the address on file. When I said I needed it sent elsewhere, she read back an account Dylan had created in my name. I gave her a new address I set up before dawn and asked for duplicate delivery. The click of her keyboard sounded like a small door wedging shut and then reopening. A PS called back with an intake number and a promise to loop law enforcement if fraud took shape. Safety from coercion, they said, is as real as safety from stairs. That decided the direction of my day. I booked a bus and flight combination with cash and wrote Lila's name in the margin. I could hear Dylan in my head talking about optics and running, but distance is not flight when the goal is space to think. It's a change of weather. Santa Fe's light is a different color, a dryness you can taste. Lila's casita took me in with coffee thick enough to stand a spoon and a spare room that smelled of cedar and bread. She called her friend, an attorney named Nora Keaton, and drove me to an office lined with law books and leather chairs that were honest about their age. Nora listened more than she spoke. She paged through the copies in a measured way that made my pulse slow. Then she laid out a three-pronged plan: an emergency temporary restraining order to freeze any sale or refinance linked to my property and that POA, a forensic document examiner to pull the forgery apart at the seams, formal complaints to the State Notary Division and the Real Estate Commission. By afternoon, she had overnighted filings to Buncombe County, making the case for irreparable harm and asking the court to hold the line until a hearing could be set. Cease and desist letters left her inbox for Dillon's brokerage, and notices went to lenders that any authority under the disputed POA was contested. She drafted a revocation of any prior POA for safety, then notarized my affidavit describing the clinic day and the way the clipboard walked me into this. Her paralegal sat me at a spare computer and walked me through a scrub I should have done years ago. New secure email, two-factor authentication, a fresh PIN on my cell account. When the clerk's PDF of the certified POA arrived, we zoomed until pixels became canyons. The baseline drift did not match PIN on paper. The pressure pattern was a scanner's mimicry. The examiner, Nora said, would like this. I stepped into the hall and called Sarah. It went to voicemail on the third ring. I told the machine I was safe with Lila, that I had counsel, that I would contest the document, that I loved her and expected the truth sooner rather than later. Her text arrived an hour later. Dad, I'll explain. Please don't make this worse. The word "this" bothered me, a blanket thrown over a fire to smother the image instead of the heat. I typed and deleted, typed again and sent. Did you sign as a witness? Lila drove me to a senior center where a counselor drew a map of the ways families and strangers use paper to move elders like furniture. She handed me a checklist that said, keep originals, never sign flagged stacks, record signings on your phone, trust your unease. I felt seen and infuriated in equal measure. The anger was clean this time, not the iron taste from the curb. Near sunset, Nora called and said the TRO was signed. For now, my house could not be sold from under me. The relief was physical, a loosened belt after a too-tight day. It lasted 12 heartbeats. Her investigator had clocked a coming soon teaser on the MLS, posted by a shell agent tied to Dillon. It would be yanked, she said. The order would handle that. But it meant corners being cut and a willingness to pretend the law is decorative. I stepped onto Lila's small porch and let the New Mexico sky rinse the noise from my head. The light thinned into silver and a single moth tapped the bulb in a patient code. I told myself out loud I would win this on paper and in daylight. In Nora's office the next morning, I slid the disputed POA beneath a paperweight shaped like a Zia sun, its arms pointing in 4 directions that all meant persistence. We built a list titled, What to Do Tomorrow, Meet the Document Examiner, Letters to Banks, Contact Neighbors to Request Doorbell Footage, Ask the Simmons boy whether his phone saw what my eyes did. As I walked out with the list in my pocket, I felt ready, unaware that somewhere on the internet a stranger had already cut my face into a story I did not recognize and given it a soundtrack that would stain before it could be scrubbed. Morning cut into the casita in clean, dry light, the kind that makes edges behave. Layla left a mug by the dented kettle and a note that said she'd be back by noon. I sat up at her little table, cleared last night of placemats, and arranged my stack, TRO copy, my notebook, a new folder labeled with a strip of blue painter's tape. Distance did its work. The house in Asheville felt far enough away that my chest could draw a full breath without bumping into the memory of a slammed door. I told myself again that leaving was strategy, not flight. Coercion does worse work when it has to cross state lines. Nora's office smelled like leather and old paper, a scent I learned to trust when I was young and courts still scared me. She rolled a pen between her fingers while I swore out an affidavit about the clinic clipboard. We signed and she notarized a revocation of any prior power of attorney, belts, and suspenders for a case that would try to wriggle. She slid a packet across the desk, complaint to the State Notary Division naming Denise Klein for irregularities, and I initialed where tabs told me. A paralegal fired off cease and desist letters to Dillon's brokerage and MLS compliance, attaching the TRO with a tone that left little room for misinterpretation. Notices went to lenders and title companies. Authority disputed, do not proceed. Paper against paper. The forensic document examiner slotted us in for tomorrow. Nora took specimen signatures from checks and an old DMV form. Under magnification, she said, the POA's signature looked like it had been cut from another page, flattened by a scanner and dropped on top of a template. She didn't promise. Good lawyers don't. She said we'd have a formal report soon enough. We turned to practical shields. The paralegal reset my cell account PIN and bolted two-factor authentication to my email. Fraud alerts went out to the bureaus. I opened a new checking account with a balance too small to be tempting. We listed the systems Dillon could still control: smart locks, utilities, security subscriptions. Requests to reclaim ownership queued with their polite automated replies. I copied account numbers in careful block letters like a man carving his name into wet concrete. I called Sarah from the parking lot. Wind pushed grit across the asphalt. She sounded tired and small. She repeated Dillon's line about a few weeks and asked me not to escalate. I asked if she had witnessed the POA. Silence opened and stayed open long enough to tell the truth. It was confusing, she said. I swallowed what I wanted to say and settled for patience that did not mean surrender. Back at the casita, Leela held out her phone. A TikTok anonymous account, a handle designed to be forgettable, had cut together doorbell clips and interior camera angles from my living room. My raised voice became a looping crescendo. A glass set down on the counter was reversed and repeated until it looked like slamming. The caption announced an elder meltdown and praised a son-in-law for protecting his wife. Neighbors were already in the comments with their lawn chair verdicts. Two small news accounts had boosted it, hungry for anything with an arc and a villain. Shame hit first, hot, choking, wrong, and then clarity followed it like cool air. The time codes leapt. The audio was stitched. This was a story manufactured for a feed. Nora told me not to post a rant. Instead, she engaged a forensic media analyst, sent preservation letters to the platform and to Dillon's brokerage, and drafted a spoliation notice regarding the camera systems. She reminded me that discovery is a better light than outrage. An email arrived from a law firm with Dillon's name in the signature block. It demanded I take down the small warning I'd posted about forged paperwork and cease defamatory statements. It promised a lawsuit, Nora typed while she talked, outlining an anti-slapp response if they filed. Discovery, she said, would pry open raw footage, install invoices, cloud backups, and whatever else they forgot to hide. She hit send, and I let the rhythm of her keystrokes calm the animal part of my fear. Community is slower than clicks, but it holds. I went to see Pastor Ethan Reyes. He listened and then wrote a short letter on church letterhead about my demeanor and reliability over years of service and grief. He offered the hall if I needed a neutral place to meet people. I recorded a private statement at his desk, calm and plain, listing facts and asking anyone with doorbell or street video from the eviction day to share it with Nora's office. I did not post it. Not yet. Names filled a page: Mrs. Delaney, the Simmons boy with the phone, and Aiden Park, the drone kid who flew at sunset. Nora's investigator reached out. Aiden replied that he might have something, but his footage was under a temporary police hold from a minor flight violation. It was enough to thread a hopeful needle through the day. That night, I thought about how a life can be crumpled into a 30-second clip and ironed flat by people who will never learn your coffee order. My back hurt the way it does when you stand too long thinking about doors that were yours yesterday and someone else's today. I printed stills from the smear and slid them into a manila folder I labeled, in a hand steadier than I felt, "Lies, pending proof." I set the kettle on and listened to it tick as it cooled, the little metallic contractions that mean heat is leaving and shape remains. Tomorrow would bring the examiner, letters to banks, and a formal complaint to the Real Estate Commission. Somewhere ahead, I could feel the next fight move from doctored images to money pipelines with my name bent into them. Keystrokes can bend backs. Paper can unbend them, given light and time. I laid out my blue folder, turned off the lamp, and let the desert night settle its austere mercy over the casita. I chose daylight and a public table. When soft promises meet hard terms, who walks away holding the bill? The examiner's studio looked like a watchmaker's chapel, lamps on articulated arms, a microscope poised like a praying mantis, trays of pens arranged by nib and mood. Nora stood beside me with a legal pad, letting the quiet take the measure of us before the science began. The examiner, calm eyes, ink smudged at the base of her thumb, slid two enlarged signatures under oblique light. On the left, mine from an old DMV renewal and a canceled check. On the right, the signature on the power of attorney that had pried my life loose. She tapped the page with a capped pen. Pressure profile flattened where a pen should breathe. Identical vector artifacts on two separate letters tells a human hand can't make. Baseline drift that doesn't match my arthritis-tugged lean. In plain English, a cut-and-paste composite dressed in pixels as ink. She angled a second sheet, and the notary seal rotated minutely against the printed border, a misalignment consistent with post-scan overlay. "I'll issue a formal report," she said, "and yes, I testify." Something in my shoulders let go. Not victory, not yet. Just the first clean room in a filthy house. Back at Nora's office, the phone rang with a Buncombe County clerk on the line. Someone using a profile tied to Dylan's brokerage had tried to rush a change of mailing address on my deed abstracts and pull certified copies. The clerk froze it after seeing our TRO. Nora wrote the name and time in her pad, underlining twice. "Fraud is clumsy when it runs." Her investigator arrived, breathing desert dust, and set a spreadsheet on the table. Credit pulls and lender pings in my name the week before the curbside theater. Two entries glowed like live wires, a national reverse mortgage lender and a nimble fintech servicer. Status column, conditional approval, voice verification passed. Down the page, a cryptic note about a call center timestamp matched the afternoon Dylan took me for that errand. Nora's intake email pinged with a burner tip. "Voice print does not equal man ask for the call," it said, along with 4 digits that looked like an application fragment. Breadcrumbs from a ghost who wanted the living to wake up. Nora fired a preservation letter to the lender and CC'd a regulator. By dusk, we sat in her conference room with a speaker in the center and an audio file someone believed would bury me. My voice filled the room. It gave my full name and last 4 of my social security and consented with a steady, church-quiet cadence. It even used a phrase I'd used only once, reading my wife's eulogy. "I understand and affirm." I gripped the table. Shame rose the way it had with the smear video. Then I heard it, the too-perfect steadiness of the formants, the room tone that vanished between syllables, the absence of breath where a man's age gives him away. They had fed my morning into a cheap model and poured the result down a bank's throat. I said one sentence because naming snakes matters. That is a synthetic voice. Nora nodded, already drafting in her head. She looped our media analyst onto a call. "Spectral seams," he said, "formant stability too clean, room tone discontinuities." He wanted originals, not compressed files. He promised an affidavit that would read like a weather map of fraud. The lender's disbursement sheet arrived next, grudgingly, with redactions that still bled detail. First draw didn't chase liens right away, funds routed to a pass-through account, then earmarked for community ministry housing. Beneficiary, Hearth and Haven Housing Ministries, EIN Barely Dry, Reverend Caleb Briggs as signatory. Nora's contacts pulled charity filings and social posts, photo ops with Dylan at small-town fundraisers, donor lists that overlapped like two hands in prayer. Wire fraud wears a collar when it thinks that will keep it from a frisk. Regulatory bodies prefer letters to outrage. Nora filed with the state banking regulator and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, citing voice verification failures and KBA sloppiness. She CC'd the lender's general counsel and the reverse mortgage investor who would dislike learning that their safeguards were held together by string. The ask was plain: void the loan, freeze proceeds, audit the pipeline. My phone hummed with Sarah's name. She whispered from what sounded like a supply closet, hospital air whooshing behind every word. She said Dylan pushed cameras, pushed paperwork, pushed urgency. She said she was pregnant and scared and didn't read what she signed when he told her it was a duplicate discharge form from my clinic visit. I just wanted peace, she said. I kept my voice even. Truth now prevents charges later, I told her. I asked if she would sign a declaration. She didn't say yes, she didn't say no. Sometimes the first mercy in a wreck is that the survivor looks back. I carried the smears printed stills to Pastor Ethan. He read them like a man reads a weather report, eyes on the wind, not the thunder. He wrote a letter about my demeanor, about years of grief that made me gentler, not cruel. Public lies sprint, he said. Paper truths finish. I underlined the sentence twice in my notebook because good counsel deserves ink. Dylan's counsel sent an offer shaped like kindness and weighted like threat. Withdraw complaints, transition peacefully, accept a stipend and an NDA. Nora drafted a reply with 3 bullets. No NDA. Loan rescission and a letter of exoneration. Preservation of every second of camera footage and every cloud backup. She added a paragraph about referrals for forgery and wire fraud. When she finished, she looked older and better. What hurt most, I realized as I initialed each page of my affidavit, wasn't only the loss of a house, it was the theft of a voice. First a doorbell clip that taught strangers to hate the shape of my mouth, then a bank line that believed a mouth without breath. I read the affidavit aloud and heard the old carpenter's cadence, the one that squares and checks again. My voice reclaimed in small, stubborn inches. Nora's investigator brought gossip shaped like warning. Dylan, he said, was planning a face-to-face through Sarah and maybe an uncle. Pressure dressed as reconciliation. I knew the move. I also knew what refusing might cost me with my daughter. I chose to meet on my terms. Public place, daylight. Wired by Nora. Paper and light. No corners where shadows write their own minutes. At dusk, I stood in Lila's doorway and watched the New Mexico sky turn copper until it looked poured. In my left hand lay the transcript of a stranger's imitation of me. In my right, the examiner's notes that unstitched a forgery. Ink and blood make families. Money tries to erase both. I turned back inside and signed the next set of papers, each stroke a small nail in a frame I intended to live in long enough to teach my grandson one day how to set it true. I woke in Leela's casita already dressed in resolve. The desert light came in thin stripes through the blinds, laying careful lines across the blue folder I'd packed the night before. On top sat a single page, Nora's term sheet, and beneath it the recorder I would wear flat against my sternum. Before we left for the airport, Nora called and set the boundaries again like chalk on a courtroom floor. Public place, daylight, no back rooms. I would wear the recorder. Her investigator would sit 2 booths away, nothing signed at the table. Any offer had to arrive later in writing. I repeated the rules back until they sounded like prayer. Asheville greeted me with leaf-smoked air and the kind of humidity that sticks even in October. I took a cab to the diner by the French Broad, a place where the Formica remembers families and waitresses call you honey without condescension. My boots knew the floor, my hands knew the weight of the door, my chest knew it was too close to the house. I asked for a booth that faced the room and the entry. The river ran behind the windows like a patient witness. I thought about tables while I waited. One table held plates and pie and a human attempt at closeness. The other table, the legal one, held TROS, affidavits, regulators, and the slow weight of process. I promised myself I would keep the first table civil and let decisions count only on the second. The recorder buzzed once to tell me it was live. I poured water and watched the surface settle. Sarah arrived first, shoulders hunched into her cardigan, hands worrying a straw wrapper into a white string. She looked like every nurse midway through a night shift, competent, exhausted, kind. "Hey, Dad," she said, small and real. The wrapper broke in her fingers. Dylan came 5 minutes later in brokerage, casual, no jacket, smile muffled to seem contrite. He went to slide in beside Sarah. I gestured to the seat opposite, where the window glare would put the river behind him and the room in front of me. He obeyed because performance likes the shape of agreement. We let the waitress bring coffee because refusing coffee makes a scene. He opened with the voice of a man who sells resolutions. "There are no winners here," he said. "We all made mistakes." Maybe we pause the complaints, talk through a private resolution. I can make a stipend happen. I saw the pitch cards change hands. Sarah whispered, "Please, let's keep this calm," as if calm were the same as consent. I kept my words straight and spare. "Facts first," I said. "All proposals in writing, no NDA, no mutual gag." I slid Nora's term sheet across like a carpenter sliding a square against a board. "I'll sell the house on my terms through an independent brokerage with no ties to you. After fraudulent encumbrances are rescinded in writing, every net dollar goes into an irrevocable trust in my wife's name, beneficiary Jacob, trustee me for life. You and Sarah get no cash from the sale. And I continue my referrals for forgery and elder exploitation." The recorder caught my breath, and then my voice again, saying it aloud, made it truer. He smiled the way a door smiles before it sticks. "I already have buyers pre-marketed," he said. "Cutting me out loses you equity. Trusts get messy. You'll hate the fees." Sarah's head turned sharply. She hadn't heard pre-marketing. I filed the flinch at the legal table. Outside, a heron took a slow step in the shallows and held its pose as if the river needed stillness to remember itself. I looked at Sarah, not past her. "You told me on the phone you signed a witness line once," I said. "We'll help you give a declaration. Love doesn't cancel accountability." Her mouth trembled and then stilled. "I didn't read it," she said. "He said it was a duplicate." The straw wrapper was now a knot. The choice was always coming, but it felt new when I spoke it in that room. "I'm selling the house," I said, "not as surrender, but as repositioning. If I hold, you slow bleed me with process. If I convert it to a protected trust, the asset becomes a shield. I'm leaving North Carolina for New Mexico. The fight stays on paper. My life moves to where the air's not poisoned." It sounded like a concession to anyone who keeps score with acreage. To me, it sounded like the foundation of the next thing I could live in. I pulled out the one-page term sheet and pointed at the lines. Independent listing, escrow instructions routing net proceeds to the trust, buyer representations that they had no conflict with Dylan or his entities, and the condition that the reverse mortgage be voided in writing before closing. "Any response goes to Nora," I said. "She speaks for me where it counts." He reached for theater, the neighbor's eye handshake. "We should shake on a truce," he said. "Optics matter." I paid the check instead, thanked the waitress by name because her name deserved to survive this room, and stood. The recorder caught his mutter, "Old men and sunk costs," as the vinyl sighed under him. It was a line meant to bruise when backs were turned. It would read differently on paper. At the airport, I called Nora on her secure line and gave her the play-by-play. Soft settlement pitch, pre-marketing admission, Sarah's partial confession, the terms delivered without wobble. She greenlit the next moves. She would circulate the term sheet to an independent Asheville broker she trusted, begin drafting the trust, and notify the lender that rescission was a condition of any sale. Her voice clicked from counsel to care at the edge of goodbye. "You did what you needed to do," she said. "Now let the paper walk." I sat at the gate with my palms pressed together, remembering the banister nicks and the rope shadow of the swing, as if my hands could still map the house by touch alone. The grief came quieter now, like tide against pilings. I told myself I wasn't losing wood so much as keeping the grain, the pattern of living I could carry forward. I made a list on the boarding pass back. Ship the tools west, find a small shop in Santa Fe, teach again, fix what is broken for people who bring me things with stories in them. When the plane pushed back, my phone lit with a push alert from a local blog, parroting the TikTok smear with a new headline that preferred heat to light. I watched the runway lights stream past and breathed through my nose until the urge to answer a lie faded. Paper truths finish. The TRO stood. Anti-slapp was ready. Witnesses were gathering, and a drone somewhere held its secret until it didn't. I closed my eyes and felt the recorder as a small, warm weight against my chest, a metronome for a story that would now keep time on my terms. The independent broker met me on the curb with a clipboard and a voice that didn't crowd. The TRO sat in his file like a stop sign. We walked through the house under a soft morning that smelled of wet leaves, and I inventoried the rooms by touch more than sight. My thumb found the old nicks in the banister. The porch swing threw its familiar rope shadow across the boards. The framed photo of my wife was already boxed, a little silence where light used to land. Elegy is a posture you learn. I stood in it without folding. We signed the listing agreement at the kitchen counter where the grain still remembered Sunday loaves. Escrow instructions matched Nora's one-page plan. The net proceeds would flow into an irrevocable trust in my wife's name, beneficiary Jacob, trustee me for life. Condition precedent. The reverse mortgage must be rescinded in writing before any closing. The broker explained open houses as if reading a recipe, sign-in logs, no interior cameras, conflict attestations from every buyer's rep. My pen didn't shake. Paper moved the day forward by inches, which is the only honest speed. Outside, a neighbor's dog pressed its nose through the fence slats and huffed at the strangeness of men with clipboards. A local blog had copied the smear and pasted it into a headline that preferred heat and comments bent into their usual shapes. The broker posted a neutral notice of sale that cited the TRO and a disputed power of attorney without names. I wrote half a reply to the blog, then deleted it and saved my breath for affidavits. I loaded the truck the way you load yourself for a winter you intend to outlast. 2 hand planes wrapped in rags, a chisel roll, the dented kettle, 3 boxes marked shop and a marker that still smelled like the store. The rest I left for a clean-out crew who would not know which drawer stuck in the summer. The river flashed between buildings on my way to the interstate, and the mountains gave me their layered goodbye. I told the wheel what I had told myself. I left the house. I kept my name. Santa Fe held its dry light up like a clean sheet. Lila opened the casita door with cinnamon on her sleeve, and I set a saw bench against the wall and claimed a corner of floor big enough for repair work. Routine stitched itself back together. Mornings at a small artisan shop where the bell rang like a spoon on a jar. Afternoons helping Pastor Ethan at elder justice nights, listening to stories that sounded like mine told in different rooms. A woman described being walked through a duplicate document. A man spoke of a son who called a loan a bridge. We nodded without drowning. Regulators began to breathe in the case. Nora forwarded the examiner's notes and the voice clone memo to attorneys general in 2 states. The banking regulator wrote back with language as careful as a bomb squad. Investigation opened. Lender cooperation noted. Voice verification under review. Paper gathered mass without noise. A letter came from Sarah, handwriting I recognized from spelling tests and birthday cards, postmarked Asheville. She said she was pregnant, ashamed she had signed a witness line she did not read, more afraid of Dylan's temper than a judge, and desperate for counsel before a declaration. I wrote back on a small card, kept it to 3 sentences. Love stands, truth first, Nora will protect the process. I did not include forgiveness because forgiveness is not a coupon. It's a bridge you don't step onto until the piling's set. Process does not run alone, it is hunted. A courier brought a defamation complaint filed by Dylan in North Carolina over my modest warning post. Nora answered with an anti-slapp motion and a motion to dismiss attached the TRO, the examiner's prelim, and the lender's letters. A hearing 2 weeks out landed on the calendar like a date circled in pencil. Pastor Ethan drafted a short statement about how a public smear bruises a neighborhood's trust. I slid it into the folder labeled Court Reputation. The next twist came on a Tuesday with the desert sky so clear it looked polished. Nora's phone lit with a message from Aiden Park, the drone kid. Police had released his confiscated drive after a temporary hold for a no-fly mistake. He had sunset footage the day I was pushed off my porch. He thought it might matter. He hoped it helped. I watched the raw file in Nora's conference room with the analyst sitting forward like a man listening for a weak bearing. The drone rose above my cul-de-sac, neat roofs, a slow river of heat shimmering off shingles. Aiden had hovered in a legal slice of sky and tilted down. The frame held the walkway, my door, Dylan's silver pickup. Timestamps nested in the lower corner, GPS in the metadata. We saw Dylan shoulder my wife's suitcase and let it drop with theatrical carelessness, the thud visible before it was audible. We saw him glance up and down the street, then kneel by the window and adjust a small camera inside with 2 quick turns of a wrist. The analyst froze frames, read out the hash, and nodded. "Chain of custody is clean," he said. "You've got pre-staging and an untampered timeline." Nora moved fast in the quiet way that counts. A subpoena Deuces Tecum went out. Aiden surrendered the SD card and controller logs. The analyst drafted an affidavit connecting frames to the minutiae of eviction and the placement of interior recording. Nora dropped stills and the affidavit into the anti-slapp record, then sent a litigation hold to Dylan's brokerage for all camera installs and cloud archives. She began a separate draft for invasion of privacy and wiretap violations. Pastor Ethan prepared a short paragraph for the court about the smear's harm to the small fabric of our street. At the casita, I planned a strip of walnut until a ribbon curled up like an old hurt, thin, precise, then gone. Grief had been a slab I couldn't move. Craft turned it into shavings. I wrote in my notebook the sentence I have taken as a gate: public lies sprint, paper truths finish. Then I added, drone footage equals longer stride. I installed 2 simple locks on the casita and a basic camera I owned outright. Ownership of the watchman matters when you've been watched. I made a rule I could keep: no posting, no arguing online, all communication through Nora. At night, I wrote the day down so memory couldn't be edited later by anyone's ambition. Near dusk, Nora called with 2 notes that made the day end on the right kind of weight. The lender had signaled an openness to void the reverse mortgage if the voice clone finding held through formal review. Regulators were watching, and the court set dates for the anti-slapp hearing and a status conference on TRO enforcement. I stacked the folders, POA forgery, IVR audio, drone evidence, into one pile that felt like a spine. I let my hand rest on the dented kettle's handle and listened to the tick of cooling metal. Tomorrow would be for court prep and the simple, patient work of turning proof into relief. Dawn in Santa Fe was blue and deliberate, the kind of light that leaves no corners for shortcuts. I laid out the exhibits on Lila's kitchen table and rehearsed facts the way a carpenter rehearses a cut he can't afford to miss. The blue folder closed with a soft thump. The dented kettle exhaled a last curl of steam. Public lies sprint, paper truths finish, I said once, not as a charm but as muscle memory, and carried the stack to the door. The flight back to North Carolina felt shorter than it had any right to. In the courthouse hallway, Nora set our spine. Tab A, the TRO, Tab B, the examiner's report with photographs of the cut-and-paste signature, and the notary seal rotated like a loose tooth. Tab C, the IVR transcript and the analyst's memo on the cloned voice. Tab D, Aiden's drone affidavit with hashes and GPS. Tab E, Pastor Ethan's community letter. Tab F, APS intake and regulator confirmations. She walked chain of custody like a beat cop, touching each link with a finger that had no tremor. The anti-slapp hearing opened on a bench scrubbed of drama. The judge asked about the TikTok and the blog. Nora built the bridge from pre-staged cameras and edited clips to reputational harm and a lawsuit used as a gag. She kept her verbs clean. She showed how my modest warning post existed to report fraud to regulators, not to pick a fight in a comment section. She pressed the point that Discovery would peel back the edits and invoices. The court granted the motion, struck Dylan's complaint, ordered preservation of all camera and cloud archives, and set briefing on sanctions. Fees to be awarded, the judge said, as if reading a temperature we'd been feeling for months. In the TRO status conference, the court extended the order and directed the Register of Deeds to annotate my file with a disputed POA flag. Expedited discovery got a green light. Subpoenas to Dylan's brokerage, to Reverend Caleb Briggs's Hearth and Haven accounts, to the Notary Commission. The docket numbers went down on a pad I've started to think of as my second set of house keys. At lunch, Nora's phone lit with a call from the state banking regulator and the lender's general counsel. They confirmed what paper had been straining toward: rescission of the reverse mortgage for failure of voice verification and KBA integrity. Funds in suspense would be frozen and recalled. A letter would follow. I felt the relief in my knees first, a sudden softening, as if a tourniquet had been loosened after a long march. One artery clamped, one lever removed. The criminal vector opened almost on its own. The DA's office asked to schedule me for a statement on elder exploitation and wire fraud. The notary board issued a temporary suspension of Denise Klein's commission pending hearing. Nora scribbled names and dates, keeping the civil timeline clean so the criminal work could breathe without stepping on it. Pastor Ethan's letter slid into the file with the quiet authority of a hand on your shoulder. On the courthouse steps, he read a short statement for a couple of local mics, asking the town to be patient with the truth. There were no chants, no applause line. He finished with a nod and walked away. I stayed off camera. The independent broker issued a factual release that the listing would proceed and that no party would discuss merits beyond what the court had made public. The day did not bloat with victory. It sharpened. In Nora's conference room, Sarah gave a sworn declaration with the blinds drawn and a glass of water sweating beside her elbow. She confirmed she had signed a witness line at the clinic under Dylan's pressure, that she knew nothing about any reverse mortgage, that she had not understood the scope of cameras placed in my home. She agreed to cooperate. I thanked her without embroidery. Love stood in the room, but so did accountability, and they did not crowd each other. Subpoena returns on Hearth and Haven came in like wires humming, and EIN registered weeks before the reverse mortgage attempt. Bank statements with pass-through activity and charitable outflows too thin to hang a sermon on, donor lists overlapping with Dylan's events. Nora drafted a civil claim for fraudulent conveyance and unjust enrichment and set it aside like a tool she knew we'd need when the timing set. Meanwhile, the sale moved under safeguards that made sense to anyone who has ever watched a deck collapse for lack of braces. The broker ran open houses with sign-in logs and buyer representatives signing no-conflict attestations. The title company acknowledged the lender's rescission and began clearing the file. Escrow instructions directing the net into the trust were countersigned. People walked through the rooms where my life had once echoed and measured for sofas. It did not feel like erasure. It felt like conclusion. Back in Santa Fe, I let a maple drawer front teach my hands how to breathe. Long passes with 220 grit, grain rising and then settling under my palm. The courtroom noise fell away with each stroke. In my notebook I wrote, "I will answer lies with documents and leave the door to forgiveness unlocked but guarded. A craftsman's promise is a contract you make in your own name." Administrative confirmations stacked quietly. The clerk issued a minute order awarding anti-slapp fees, amount to be set. Litigation holds pinged in from Dylan's brokerage and the platform that hosted the smear. A PS logged cross-agency cooperation underway. None of it made a headline. All of it mattered. That night, Lila served stew and set the good spoons on the table like we were company. I read the lender's formal rescission letter out loud and slid it beneath the Zia Sun paperweight with the drone stills and the signature report. The pile looked like a modest monument to persistence. No brass, no marble, just paper properly stacked. Nora called late with next dates. A sanctions hearing on the anti-slapp, depositions on the forged POA, a tentative buyer timeline if inspections held. I stood in the doorway of the casita and let the desert cool rinse the courthouse air from my clothes. The story had tilted. Defense was becoming construction. Close the sale, fund the trust, repair the name. I touched the dented kettle on my way to bed, thinking of how metal remembers heat and then forgets it, and how a life can too if you give it enough time under a steady hand. I woke before the sun and cleared Lila's small table the way a carpenter clears a bench before the last pass. Wire instructions on the left, the irrevocable trust binder on the right, blue folder in the middle under the Zia Sun paperweight. Coffee steamed beside my elbow, patient and ordinary. I wasn't flying to North Carolina for the closing. Nora had built a remote lane wide enough for caution and narrow enough for mistakes to fall off. We would sign from Santa Fe, notarize here, and let the filings walk east without me. The title officer appeared in a small, well-lit rectangle, all checklist and calm. Nora shared her screen and laid out the guardrails again. The rescission letter for the reverse mortgage was recorded. The disputed POA annotation stayed on file. Escrow instructions were locked to send net proceeds straight to the trust. Buyer representatives had re-signed no conflict attestations. My name looked steadier printed on the deed packet than it had looked on the day Dylan rolled my wife's suitcase to the curb. I signed each page slowly, squaring my initials like dovetails, watching the notary confirm and the chain of custody notch forward. The title officer put us on a brief hold for recording and came back with the tone of someone returning from a long corridor with good news. Recording complete. A wire confirmation landed in Nora's inbox and then mine, a tidy string of numbers stating that the trust in my wife's name had been funded. Jacob was listed as remainder beneficiary. I was trustee for life with the successor named. The house has left my name, I said quietly, and my name has not left me. No one needed to answer. On a parallel track, paper moved other burdens. The clerk posted the anti-slapp fee order amount, not a windfall, only fairness. Nora filed the consolidated packet, drone affidavit, signature report, rescission letter, APS intake. The independent broker issued a neutral notice that the sale was closed in compliance with court orders. 2 local outlets published correction pieces built from orders and filings rather than opinion. They didn't apologize. Newspapers rarely do. They wrote what the court had done and what the lender had undone. Pastor Ethan contributed a short line about community healing being work, not spectacle, and left it at that. The criminal lane opened without cheering. The DA filed charging documents for attempted financial exploitation and wire fraud. The court set an initial appearance for Dylan and opened a separate inquiry into Reverend Briggs and Hearth and Haven. The Notary Commission set a hearing date for Denise Klein after suspension. I got emails listing times and rooms and forms I might sign as a prospective witness. None of it felt like revenge. It felt like weather finally matching a season. Sarah came to Santa Fe on a short break between shifts. We met in Pastor Ethan's office because the room itself tells the truth. She handed me 2 ultrasound printouts and sat with her hands folded over a purse strap as if she were holding reins. She said she was sorry and didn't decorate the word with excuses. She said she had retained independent counsel and would stand by her sworn declaration. No Dylan contact, I said, and all communication through counsel. She nodded. We looked at the little bright curve on paper and chose a future that would not pretend the past hadn't happened. There's always a chair for you when truth stays in the room, I told her. She cried without noise and left before either of us tried to turn the moment into a movie. A final shipment arrived from Asheville. A slender crate with my hand planes wrapped in shop rags that smelled faintly of linseed, a small box of layout tools, and the porch swing chains salvaged with permission. I hung the chains on a peg in the casita and ran a cloth along the planes until the steel winked. Leaving the wood had hurt. Keeping the grain felt like relief. The pattern of a life had moved with me. At Elder Justice Night, I spoke for 10 minutes without a microphone. By design. I told seniors and their children about clipboards and duplicate forms, about doorbell eyes and cameras tucked into vents, about voice verification that can be fooled by grief scraped into a model. I told them to film their own signatures and keep originals in 2 places. I credited APS, the regulators, the paralegals who catch what pride misses, and a drone kid who paid attention to metadata. When I finished, no one clapped hard. They nodded and wrote down phone numbers. Humiliation had finally been replaced by usefulness. Nora forwarded a copy of the fee award check. It would find its way to her trust account to settle part of what justice costs. The platform and the brokerage acknowledged litigation holds on footage in cloud archives. Deposition dates slid into my calendar for the forged POA and the notary hearing. The DA penciled my interview. I indexed my notebook so every thread had a page number and no detail dangled. I signed a short lease on a corner bench at the artisan shop and booked 2 repair jobs, a chair with a lame leg and a drawer that groaned in humid months. I brewed coffee in the dented kettle and split a loaf with Lila, who insisted I take the better end. After dinner, I wrote a single line in my notebook. I sold my home and left the state to keep my name. It worked. Evening settled on the casita with the kind of quiet that feels earned. The porch swing chains glinted on their peg. The truss binder sat thick and orderly. The correction articles lay folded under the Zia Sun paperweight. Tomorrow I would teach a young man how to true a plane iron and write a letter to Jacob for someday, explaining how a voice can be stolen and how you take it back with paper, patience, and people who don't run when the wind comes up. Morning started with the kettle's small ticking, that gentle metronome that tells me heat is leaving but shape remains. I slid the truss binder aside, set the fee order copy on top of the court dates, and made a deliberate choice to let them sit. Today wouldn't be for filings or phone calls. It would be for meaning, what the documents pointed toward but could never fully hold. Sun pooled on Lila's table, and the room felt level again. I pulled a sheet of cream paper, dated the corner, and wrote my grandson's name. Jacob doesn't exist yet beyond a line in a trust and a promise I've made to tomorrow, but his future gives my sentences a spine. I explained why I sold the house and left North Carolina, not because wood and walls stopped mattering, but because my name mattered more. Keeping your name, I wrote, means protecting truth and dignity when paper tries to argue otherwise. I anchored the letter to 3 touchstones that got me here. First was paper. The TRO that froze bad hands, the rescission that unclogged a poisoned pipe, the trust that turned an asset into a shield. Second were people. Lila's spare room and steady food, Nora's unshowy brilliance, Pastor Ethan's quiet spine, Aiden's careful metadata, the APS worker whose questions made a path. Third was patience, letting lies sprint while truths finished, keeping my steps even when the crowd wanted to run. There were practical lines Jacob might need when urgency dressed up as love. Sign 1 page at a time, photograph your signature as you make it, record a notarization if the notary agrees, and if they don't, ask why. Keep originals in 2 places. Never let someone else hold your pen and your fear at the same time. When a man says duplicate, make him prove it. When a camera blinks, ask who owns the blinking. When a voice on the line sounds like yours, demand a second channel. I turned the page and wrote about his mother. Sarah's sworn declaration stands now like a brace under a load-bearing beam. It doesn't erase consequence, it keeps the roof from sagging. I told Jacob I'd forgiven her in a way that doesn't pretend nothing broke. Forgiveness, I wrote, is a door left unlocked but guarded. It swings when truth is in the doorway and you're ready to hold it open. I will sit in the waiting room when invited, not to rewrite, but to witness. The elder justice nights have rippled into routines that outlive headlines. Pastor Ethan and a retired banker put together a 1-page checklist from my talk and the stories of 3 others. Volunteers show seniors how to lock wireless routers, freeze credit files, and secure carriers with PINs. A pro bono notary sits by the coffee urn, stamping affidavits of common sense. It is not showy work. It builds like a deck, plank by plank, with joists you never see doing the quiet work underneath. I mounted the porch swing chains above my new bench, not as nostalgia but as instruction. They remind me that suspension is strength when anchored properly. On the bench, I placed the Zia Sun paperweight atop Jacob's envelope and slid a printed drone still into a folder labeled Proof and Proof of Life. It catches Dylan mid-gesture, the suitcase at my curb like a punctuation he thought was a period. It turned out to be a comma. I mailed copies of key orders to my P.O. box because sending truth to yourself is a habit worth cultivating. The phone chimed with calm evidence of progress. Anti-slapp fees disbursed to counsel. Deposition date firmed for the forged POA. Notary hearing scheduled, DA interview confirmed for a morning when flights are cheap. I acknowledged each and went back to the letter. Paper would keep walking along its rails. Life did not have to stand by watching. At the shop, an apprentice named Mateo brought me a plane iron that would not hold an edge. We worked through the steps, flatten the back until it reflects a clean line, then raise a burr at the bevel, then strop without hurrying the steel. I told him to use light as a second tool. Tilt, and the truth reveals itself. Documents work the same way, I said, though not as a lecture. He found the angle, pulled a perfect curl, and grinned with a pride I recognized from my first good joint. On my walk at dusk, Santa Fe opened wide like a book you can read without squinting. I named the phases under my breath: shock, collection, fight, construction. I had been optimized by a plan that wasn't mine. I am now a man who sets his own fixtures and checks them twice. The story, once loud with loss, is quiet with use. I decided I would write Jacob one letter each birthday until the letters could hand the bridge to conversation, and then I'd hand it gladly. Back at the casita, I sealed Jacob's letter and set it under the Zia sun with the trust binder and the correction clippings. The kettle ticked itself toward cool like a metronome for finished work. From somewhere beyond the adobe wall, a bell counted the hour with patience only bells possess. I stood in the doorway and spoke the sentence I want my life to keep proving. I sold my home and left the state so I could stay myself. And that at last is a place no one can take. In the end, home wasn't wood and walls. It was the pattern you refused to let be rewritten. When false stories sprinted ahead, patient documents finished the race, orders, rescissions, affidavits, and a trust that turned loss into shelter for tomorrow. Dignity held not by noise, but by steady choices made in daylight. A good name is rebuilt like fine joinery. Measure twice, cut once, clamp until the truth sets. Keep records, ask questions, own the locks on your doors and on your accounts. And when betrayal arrives wearing a smile, answer with paper, community, and time. The past can bruise, but it doesn't have to govern. What matters is the quiet of a life repaired, a kettle cooling, a bench readied, a future protected without bitterness. Thank you for spending this time with us. If something here resonated, tell us what line stayed with you and why. Share where you're watching from, add your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like more stories of resolve and hard-won peace, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Your voice keeps this circle of listeners strong.